It would be very easy today, would it not, to forget that it is Earth Day 2020, where we're looking at how we save the planet. Earth Day has actually been going for around 50 years, where 10% of people in America hit the streets to campaign on the very first Earth Day to start thinking about sustainability and how we protect our gorgeous planet. So easy, isn't it, with everything that's happening around COVID, to remember that the underlying problem we've got is how, for my children's generation and future generations, we make sure there is still an Earth that is habitable. So let's today, along with Ivor, as we look at the statistics around COVID and get under the bonnet of the statistics, let's also look at some of those statistics that are actually quite positive. For example, if you look at the fact that we're not using our cars so much and the trains and the buses and transport so much, then that must be having a real positive influence on our planet. Maybe as we come out the other side, of course, those graphs will start to go up the other way and we will all start traveling more. But maybe we don't have to travel as much as we used to. Maybe more people will work from home. Maybe less people will travel around the world doing holidays and so on and so forth. Maybe we'll be more rooted to our own towns or our own communities, and we have to do something about global warming. So let's try and sort of concentrate on some of those positives. I was thinking about the food fact for today, and what should I put up as a food fact? And we've had everything from eggs to bananas, a bit controversial with the old banana, and I thought, let's do a fish. And because we're in Great Britain, let's think of a fish that we can get quite close to our own shores, and that is the mackerel. Mackerel are so healthy, and what I keep saying to everybody, isn't it, at the moment, use these times to change what it is you eat. So take advantage that we're all stuck at home. If you can get some mackerel from your local store, your local supermarket, get it and try and cook it in a different way maybe than you've ever cooked it before, because when you get one mackerel, it has over 2.5 grams of omega-3. Now, I take 2 grams of omega-3 in capsules every single day, what we call soft gels. But by having a fish, I can then double the amount I'm having each day. They're also full of so many other amazing nutrients and vitamins and minerals that mackerel is a superstar of our oceans. And because it's caught locally, you're supporting our fishing industry. So if you can think about mackerel today, that would be fantastic. Now, today we've also got Ivor Cummins joining us. Now, Ivor Cummins is a brilliant gentleman. He is the Fat Emperor, he's not fat at all, by the way, but he's the Fat Emperor. He's written a brilliant book called Eat Rich, Live Long, which we'll be discussing today. He's also been part of 2 amazing documentaries that you can find on the internet, one called Widowmaker, which is a brilliant movie, and that's totally free, that one. If you haven't seen it yet, I recommend you go and watch Widowmaker when you get an hour later today. And he's also just released a brand new movie, which we will be talking about during the show today. We do keep asking several things. While you're watching the show, if you could make a donation to Just Giving, that would be fantastic. You can do that via the Just Giving web page, or you can donate via the text number on the screen right now, which is 70450. So I think you just type in 70450, the word Primal, and then the amount you would like to donate. And either way, we really would ask you if you can make a small donation, or even a large one if you can, because right now our food banks more than ever are being relied on across the UK as we hit a real sort of financial crunch, as well as obviously the health crunch. More and more people finding it hard to put a meal on their table for themselves and their children. So we need to donate both by putting food into the food banks and those collection boxes in the supermarkets, but also at the same time, a financial donation is really, really helpful. If you could just spare £5 or £10 and put that on Just Giving, because right now, more than ever, people are going hungry in the UK, and we could really do with your support. Now, good morning to Jack, my son, who's directing the show this morning. I've thrown all sorts of challenges at him this morning because at the very last minute, I decided to change all the cameras around, and I don't know if he has idea which one is which. I've got not a clue. I don't even know which one I'm looking at. Am I looking at that camera or that one?
This one.
That one. Good. So there's Jackie's driving the show this morning. Have you managed to get Ivor with us?
Indeed.
You do indeed. Okay, in just a moment we'll be going to speak to Ivor. Before we do, if you could, as you enjoy the show today, give it a thumbs up. If you could share it, that would be amazing. If you could also at the same time subscribe to our channel, that will help us out immensely, but also at the same time will help notify you as we put new videos up. And we do try and put a new video or two up every couple of days. We put a new cooking video up yesterday. Now this is one of the favorite things I cook at home for my children, because I love cheese, I love homemade pate, but of course you can't have bread when you're trying to live low carb. Let's show you our alternative. So that's the flaxseed biscuits. They are so easy to create. You can throw in all sorts of different herbs and spices. You can put the paprika in like we did there. You can put so many, I love putting Oregon seeds in. You can do all sorts of things. I did a couple of days ago try and do it by putting some coconut, desiccated coconut in, because I love coconut. But the problem with that is it makes it a bit soggy. Good morning, Ivor. How are you?
Good morning, Steve. I'm great, thanks. And yourself? All good here. I'm getting a little pudgy though with all this lockdown. Have hardly left the house. Yeah. Eat rich, live long. Ah, yes, it's all the science, the history of where we went wrong in nutrition, and it's got a lot of recipes from our chef. So we got a professional low carb chef in to do beautiful recipes, I think. So a lot to try out there as well as the science. Right. Well, okay, some statistics on the corona, and we'll probably need the slides here from Jack I sent earlier.
Okay.
Maybe the first slide, C1. And just while we're waiting, oh, there it is. So there's a lot of emotion and fear, and that's understandable. A lot of tragedy that's unfolding. What I try to do, though, because I've led many kind of crisis management situations in the past, not involving humans, but technical ones, hundreds of millions of parts, $100 million kind of losses in the balance. And you really have to sometimes, when you look at data, just look at data and put aside the human side, just so there's some clarity. So it's not to be callous, but data is data, and it needs to be looked at dispassionately while you're trying to understand the situation. So just to maybe reassure people a little, what's on the screen now are a couple of samples of who's being impacted and who's not so much being impacted. Now, there will be younger people and healthy people affected. It's a very severe virus, but we have to look at the big picture too, just for some context. So on the left, you see an example, Portugal, and it's comparing overall death rates to previous years, the average of 14 up to 19. And as you can see, the spike in mortality for all age groups on the top left, it's substantial. Like we say, it's a severe virus. But for the under 65-year-olds, you don't even really see a spike compared to previous years.
Sure.
And it just illustrates a point. Now, on the right, I had an Australian health guy who actually got into the program and put in over 75 and under 75, and you actually see the same thing. So it just illustrates a point. Everybody counts or nobody counts, but it's important to keep in mind that the real impact is in the older people or people with illnesses, and they're the ones who primarily need to be protected. And that's a point that's sometimes not getting across in mainstream media, to be quite honest. There's a lot of sensationalist articles, and it can be very confusing for the person in the street to really have a grasp of the numbers. So I've got a few more slides, and they illustrate more points like this.
Excellent. I mean, the thing is this, isn't it? Because, every death, every illness is a tragedy at the end of the day. And of course, we're going to focus on that one youngster that's tragically died with no other symptoms, with any underlying, with no diabetes, no obesity. There's always going to be the occasional incident, and every death is a tragedy. But like you say, what we have to do is not make that the focus of the news, because if that's the focus of the news, we're blowing it a little bit out of proportion, because your two graphs there clearly showed that it is mainly affecting those that are older, and therefore also by focusing in on that, we really have to, my mom and dad are in lockdown right now, and we're being really strict as kids to our parents to say, look, you have to observe this, because, don't get misled by the news saying it's happening to everybody. It really is mainly happening to those that are older and those that are, very much overweight.
Yeah, exactly. And the kind of positive side of this, not to distract or deflect, of course, from other tragedies, but we have billions of people in the world. So any severe virus is going to affect all people to some extent, but we need perspective. So maybe slide 2, I'm not sure, might bring a little more perspective. I think it's C2. Yeah, so just to illustrate, it's pretty much all countries. So on the left, we see Swiss data. And again, that's over 65s in the upper curve for all-cause mortality. And we, of course, see the spike for this problem. And again, under 65s, almost no kind of change in the curve. So it's pretty consistent. On the right, I actually yesterday got Boston data. Now, Boston data is amazingly comprehensive. I was actually pleasantly shocked that the Boston authorities, and they've been hit really hard, have come out with incredibly clear data and demographics. So on the right, we see here, 81 is the average age, again, reaffirming this trend. And you can see there that 60s and over, you begin to see a significant proportion of the tragic deaths, and 70 to 79 then getting very big proportion, and then of course over 80 enormous. And as we get down to the 40s and 30s, maybe a tiny amount in the 50s, but it's very low. And we haven't even got into pre-existing conditions yet. This is just age. So illustrates the point. Now, there will be differences in different places, but America actually has a lot of metabolic disease and a lot of exposure. So I think when you show American data, it's kind of showing a worst case in a way, because younger people have a lot more metabolic disease than other countries. So I think it's a very fair to show American data. It's not underemphasizing younger people issues at all.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because Dr. Asim Malhotra was saying it's something like only 17% of American adults, so that's less than 1 in 5, have a healthy, are healthy. In other words, 17%, so 83% have some form of metabolic syndrome. So what you're saying there is that if they are, and I've got loads of friends who are American, but this is the facts. The facts are, as a country, as a nationality, they are very much, riddled with metabolic syndrome, and therefore what you're saying is it is going to be a severer case in the States if it is true that most people are dying with 1 or 2 underlying conditions.
Yeah, pretty much. And a figure I like to put out from the CDC in America, official figures in a report, I have the reference, and I totted up the different age groups. And over 45s in America, 64% of them are pre-diabetic or diabetic, just based on glucose measures. Now, pre-diabetic, diabetic, it's all type 2 diabetic. So two-thirds of your over 45s are essentially diabetic. Kind of brings home what we've done to ourselves. We can talk about root causes, of course, but primarily it's the food, processed, ultra processed food, and lack of exercise, lack of sun, stress, sleep challenges. And these days, they all add a bit, but it's mostly the foods we've been eating for the last 5 decades.
Yeah, and sadly, in the sort of modern world, what we call the Western world, which is supposed to be all about choice and all about freedom and all about being able to choose what you eat and have plenty of choice. The reality, of course, is when we get brainwashed by big advertising from an early age, that we have very little choice in the food that we eat because we think all those things that we're marketed, to every day, from the cornflakes, to the breads, from the breads to the pastas, everything. Whenever I always say, if something is advertised as a food, it's probably not good for your health, because you rarely see broccoli and cauliflower and organic beef being advertised. So America's in a lot of trouble. We're in a lot of trouble in the UK, and it's because we haven't got a lot of food choice these days.
Yeah, I mean the smaller stores, well, the supermarkets, the big stores, most of that's ultra processed food, all in the center aisles. It's only around the edge where you've got vegetables, meat, and eggs.
Yeah.
And then the smaller stores, a lot of people who have less money, maybe don't have a car, they have to depend on smaller stores. And when I go into those, it's all garbage, basically.
Yeah.
So the only thing I can get there for a lunch is maybe a packet of cheese or a packet of sliced meats. And that's what I used to do in say, a gas station, petrol station. You just get a packet of sliced cheese, a pack of sliced meat, and you got a little lunch for yourself. But most of the other stuff, it's really, really bad.
It's frightening, isn't it? Whereas if you go back to our grandparents, of course, there was lots of corner shops. There was the fruit and veg shop, and that's all it sold was real fruit, real veg, normally from a local area. And I'd say to everybody, as long as it's not too much of a drive, look in your local area, see if you can find a farm shop. Go and support your local farm shops, because that is real food. What's your view on, have you got any more slides for us, or should we?
There's actually quite a few. I don't know if you want to focus.
No, keep going.
mainly on.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, so C3 gives a bigger view of Boston. And you'll see there that but this is only an excerpt from what they put out a couple of days ago. But on the left, you can see their hospitalizations are kind of falling off. So that's great to see. There are a lot of deaths. But on the top right, we've got the graph I showed already, massively elderly biased. And then the bottom right is interesting that 97.5% have prior conditions, underlying conditions.
Wow.
And that was, I knew it would be very high percentage. But when I saw Boston, I thought, wow.
Yeah. It's almost like this disease is almost targeting people with metabolic syndrome.
It's essentially, yeah, that's now a standard influenza, which is obviously not as severe. Also does the same thing pretty much. But this one particularly, by being more severe, more harsh, and it's massively taken advantage of diabetic physiology, it would appear, even more so than the other influenza type illnesses. So it's a really tough one. And it's kind of like, I see it in a way, and not to be callous again, but it's kind of the acute manifestation of where we've got ourselves as a society. So heart disease and many cancers, Alzheimer's, they're the long kind of steady price that's being paid for metabolic disease. And now this thing has caused a sudden sharp kind of payment, which is obviously very upsetting as it happened. Yeah.
I mean, I'm always trying to look for the positives, and we'll talk about the global warming positive in a moment, but do you think coming out the other side of this, because we all support the public health collaboration, which is a group of doctors trying to say stand up and be counted, to say, look, there is an underlying problem around the food that we're eating today. And Asim Malhotra again, absolute furious that in hospitals, he repaired a guy, he's a cardiologist, Asim Malhotra, and he repaired this one guy's heart. And when he came round, he was talking to the patient and said, come on, doctor, how do I stop from having another heart attack? He said, well, you've got to cut down the carbs, you've got to cut down the processed food. And the patient turned to Dr. Asim Malhotra and said, but have you just seen the crap that you fed me in hospital, the food, on my recovery? And we've got to take this seriously coming out the other side. People have to start realizing, don't they, that what we died of 100 years ago, we've pretty much, wiped out, the smallpox, problems from not having clean water, nearly all those things we died of 100 years ago have gone. And we've just replaced them with a whole new bunch of things like the cancer, the heart disease, the Alzheimer's, depression, and so on, which can all be linked to the crap food that we're eating today.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alzheimer's now being called type 3 diabetes by many experts, insulin resistance of the brain.
Yeah.
And many of the cancers are very, very powerfully linked to insulin resistance too, like endometrial, colon cancer, breast cancers, many varieties. So all of these things are just accelerated. So these are chronic diseases of aging, and they should really occur in a very healthy person on average, kind of when they get to their 90s and they're already on the way out. But you can bring it forward decades if you keep piling the wrong food into your body. It's just the price you pay ultimately.
Yeah, and people forget that if you go back 100 years ago, it was less than 1 in 20 people would get cancer. And today, sadly, the figures are just horrendous. Even Cancer Research's own figures in the UK suggest now that 1 in 2 people alive today will at some point themselves be diagnosed with a cancer. Now, in the UK, our NHS are absolutely fantastic, and there are quite a few cancers now we can fix, we can put into remission, and so on. But wouldn't it be just much better if we didn't get it in the first place? I mean, I lost 3 grandparents, an auntie in her 50s to cancer, a best friend last year in his 30s to cancer. My nanny that looked after my children about 10 years ago died in her 20s of cancer. Wouldn't it be great if we just found a way to put it back to like it was 100 years ago?
Yeah, it would be a utopia. I mean, cancer is a terrible disease. My wife's family as well, terrible amount of it, ferocious. Her mother died in her 60s, and of her mother's siblings, I think in total, 3 or 4 out of 5 siblings essentially got similar forms of cancer. So there's a genetic susceptibility, but it massively links in with environmental drivers too. So it's a really tough one. And yeah, I know there were studies turn of the century, doctors who traveled in Africa with tribes, indigenous tribes, and in multiple years there with up to 10,000 people saw almost no examples except a couple of benign tumors. So they are very environmentally driven, and people can worry about pesticides and hair care products and all these things. But I think the big thing is what you put in your mouth if you want to look at risk factors for it.
Yeah. Over the years, by the way, I've lived with a Maasai both in Kenya and Tanzania for, if you put it collectively, for probably about 3 months, and with different tribes, because my other job is sort of looking for gemstones. And it's really, I tell you, there was a guy called Philip who was a Maasai that was like almost 7 foot tall, really fit. And he watched me go jogging every morning. And thanks, Jack. And he watched me go jogging every morning. And then one afternoon, he caught this goat. And I'm sorry to offend all the vegans, vegetarians, but he killed the goat in front of me and he chopped it all up and he gave me a piece. And I took the fat off. And I'll never forget this. He turned around to me and said, Steve, I went, what? He said, you do that running in the morning. You take the fat off the meat, so you make you big European man. I went, no, completely the opposite. I go running in the morning. I take the fat off so I don't get fat. And he went, well, it's not working. So the point is we've just got it so wrong compared to the Maasai. We've got loads of questions coming in. I know you've got some more charts to share, which we will definitely get to in a moment.
So I'd just skip to the end and listen to a few of the comments.
You'd skip to the end?
And have a look at some of the comments.
Okay, go to the end of what we've got. So Sheila says, I wonder what happens when this virus mutates eventually, which category of people it would affect. The vaccine won't be effectively, surely. Will it affect more people as it gets wider spread? I guess the question is.
Yeah, well, again, getting into detailed questions on virology and all, I'd just be a little cautious. But I would say there are reports out very recently where they've already seen multiple mutations of the strains of this very virus. There's even indications that America, West Coast may have got a slightly different strain than East Coast, could explain a difference in severity. And I think they're talking about 3 primary strains now, and they're trying to track them genetically. So I think the virus does appear will mutate, but many of them do. And we know from previous flu seasons, when there was a vaccine, I think 2 or 3 years ago, the NHS, it was very ineffective because it kind of slightly missed the strain that was more prevalent that year. So this is going to happen. The vaccine, they talk about 18 months. And then, of course, the challenge will be mutations and strains. But I'm not sure people should fear hugely mutations and strains, because that's part of the natural world. And the influenzas for decades have been kind of doing that. It may provide more challenges for sure. But I think we just have to get through this. And people will be largely immune unless it's completely different than any virus in the past, which is probably unlikely.
Yeah.
And we need to protect the most at risk. And I think that's the key thing. One ball we dropped, we'll see from some more slides in a minute. I think we missed a ball that back in February, we could have been taking the data that we did have, seeing it was massively older ages and metabolically unhealthy. And maybe we could have been ring fencing those guys more effectively, but we kind of didn't. Very little, and then we kind of locked down everyone, including the healthy. So I think maybe we might be doing better stuff next time.
Do you think even now, with that data getting so strong, we will look at some more in a moment, but with that data getting so strong, it's a complete hypothesis that I'm just thinking right now. Would we, if it is very much affecting the older and those with metabolic syndrome, to say, right, now even stricter lockdown for these 2 groups of people, but then go and chuck all the rest of us back to work, going back to our normal days. So maybe we all get infected, but then we're getting infected, therefore we get it over and done with, because we're all metabolically strong. And then what happens is then that, as we let the older people back out and those with metabolic syndrome, we won't be spreading it to them. I don't know, it's just a hypothesis.
Yeah, at the moment, it's difficult to talk freely on this, would you believe? Because there seems to be so much tension that even discussing technical scenarios, you can tend to get attacked. And I think that's just the contagion, the fear that's deep in people. It's for guttural fear. But I kind of persist in talking about the data and scenarios. So yeah, that's a very logical, reasonable type of approach. It's the approach that was pretty much always used in the past. It seems to be a bit different now, where quarantine is everyone rather than quarantining the at risk. So Sweden have done a form of that, and we have some graphs on Sweden because that's a big topic at the moment, Sweden not doing a lockdown. And their attitude is kind of like that. Protect the elderly. Now, they admitted they dropped the ball on that. They didn't actually protect the elderly properly, and it was a mistake. But in principle, protect the elderly and at risk, and then allow it to travel, because we can't hide forever. So allow it to travel in the healthier people where the impact is minimal, and they will have the normal immune response. And over time, the others will be safer to come out. And also the others, we may have better treatments, whatever about a vaccine, maybe 18 months away. For the others, in a few months, we might have good antiviral treatments that are effective. And combine that with a level of immunity that's out there and less viral shedding in the healthier people who've gone through it, you could have a pretty good scenario. So it's logical, but yeah, maybe that's what's going to start now. Denmark are opening up their lockdown, opening their schools. Multiple countries, after only a few weeks of lockdown, are opening up. So they're kind of voting with their actions, and they're kind of doing what you're saying.
Right, well, while Jack finds that slide, we're going to go to loads of great questions for you. By the way, Norma says, I could listen to Ivor all day. He has a wonderful, soothing voice and his accent is smooth. I've told everybody all along, you're the most charismatic, can't even get my words out, you're just a good guy. Chris Patterson says, I am convinced if this virus had turned up 50 years ago, we wouldn't be in this mess we are right now. Good point, hey?
It's a very good point. Hi, Chris. Again, I'm careful because saying things like that, I'll be accused of underestimating it and not caring. But if we're going to be honest about it, the 1957 flu pandemic was a much, much worse virus. I mean, in a different universe, because as well as killing older and sicker people for sure, it had an enormous tail where it killed people who were young, also under 20, and infants. And it killed around 1.5 million in the world, and it was killing young people too. So 1957 pandemic was a ribovirus, similar to this, but it was just much more severe. But yeah, people wore masks. They tried to control the spread. They did all the smart stuff. But yeah, but absolutely, there was no lockdown, because it wouldn't occur to people to do that then, because they instinctively knew that it was going to spread anyway, but you wanted to slow it down, limit the impact. So yeah, it would have been different 50 years ago. Post-war people were very different than the modern modern people, and with media and the way politics have gone, it's different. Yeah.
Great comment there, Chris. Thank you very, very much for giving us that one. Jackie in Glasgow says, after this period of no motor movement, it will be interesting to see if it has had a positive effect on the environment, thereby exonerating cattle as the main cause of the environmental problem. Jackie, I could talk. One day I'm going to do a whole podcast on why it is not the cattle that's causing the problem. Because in fact, let me just do a quick 30 seconds, because I want to support the cow, right? It is not the cow that's causing global warming. Yes, they do belch methane. And yes, methane is damaging to the ozone. But of all the methane, the cow's probably responsible for 5 or 6%. However, let the cows graze on grass like they always have done. And grass, as it grows and then gets eaten by the cows, sequestrates more carbon dioxide than even forests. After the oceans, we need more grasslands. But of course, the farmer's not going to keep his grass if we don't keep eating his cows. So I would say any cow freely left roaming, as he has done for millions of years, actually has a positive impact on the planet. And the only time I could see a scenario where maybe cows are negative is if they are locked in a shed, fed food that they shouldn't have, like corn. And of course, if that corn was created by a GMO crop with fertilizers, those fertilizers turn into nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide, of course, a huge problem for global warming. It's not just about carbon dioxide. It's not just about methane. Nitrous oxide is 200 times, molecule for molecule, more heat retaining than carbon dioxide. So yes, support the cow, it's not the cow. And then back to your point, Jackie, I'll come off my high horse. Not horse, off my high cow. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Jack. Get off my cow right now. And I'm absolutely right. I want to share that chart again in a bit for you, Jackie in Glasgow, because I believe, and this is today, of course, Earth Day. Let's not forget the underlying problem is a problem for the planet that we all share and inhabit together. I do believe, and it's just common sense, that with less people traveling, it is definitely having a positive effect on the planet. The question is, once it's all gone away, will we just return to the same way as we did before? What's your view on that, Ivor?
Yeah, I think there's going to be huge benefits for sure. And I agree totally. I mean, I got a little bit into the climate science only because of the cows and meat side. I'm not getting involved in that discussion otherwise. But the data shows in America, I think 5% of emissions generally are plant agriculture and 4% are animal, of which 2% is beef. And if you took away the 2% of emissions relating to beef, you're going to have to make more plants to feed people, and the protein isn't even as available. So to be honest, the whole argument is ridiculous, because it's the shale gas and it's the burning of fossil fuels that are putting the irreversible CO2 into the air. The methane has got a very short cycle, and it goes back into the ground or into CO2. And there's only tiny amounts in the atmosphere of methane in real terms to absorb, compared to even water vapor, which absorbs vastly more heat. So I think it's more a political point, the cows, whatever about general global warming. the cows is political. And a study in New Zealand, actually, they fed a certain type of seaweed as a supplement. And this was a peer-reviewed published study. And they got around 70 or 75% less methane being emitted. And it was only a supplement. You didn't have to feed them a mountain of seaweed. It just changed the gut bacteria.
Wow.
And this paper, apparently 2 major journals weren't interested in it. And they admitted that the science was perfect. It just didn't really fit their editorial. In other words, they don't want a solution, really, politically, to the cow problem, a technical solution. They kind of want the cows to be bad because it fits a message and an agenda. And I think the agenda is the anti-meat agenda, for what it's worth.
Well, there's 2 agendas, I totally agree. The anti-meat agenda, but also if you can blame the cow, you can keep putting your planes in the sky. If you can blame the cow, you can keep making cars without batteries. You know what I mean? We would, if we didn't blame the cow and we blamed the car, then there would be, we should all be doing what Elon Musk is doing. Anyway, I don't want to get involved in all that, but there you go. Right, more fan base for you. Sheila says, yes, I love his smooth voice. Well, we're going to hear that a few times today. Nick says, do the stats say, this is a great one. Do the stats say men are more prone to COVID-19 than women?
Generally speaking, yeah, it might be a 60-40, 65-35. It depends on the country and what report you read. I'd say largely the reason is that men are more prone to metabolic disease for a given age. We kind of see that in everything else, in heart disease, heart attacks, and in many other things. So I think all it is that men are more prone to become diabetic physiology than women. Women tend to catch up later on for physiological reasons. So I don't think there's anything more interesting in it than that. I think it's one of the least compelling or important statistics maybe in this whole challenge.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the data from early data from China and Italy with 2.7 underlying conditions, and the 2 that were most underlying was high blood pressure and diabetes. Well, it probably just the slight difference in data probably is the fact that we have more gents suffering with diabetes and we have more gents suffering with high blood pressure. So it could be as simple as that. I'd like to go back. Earlier on you said we got some more charts with data from Sweden. Have we got that available, Jack?
Yeah, if we go to C4 very quickly, I'll go through a couple of quick ones before Sweden, but not dwell. So again, there's a big controversy at the moment as to what's the prevalence in the population. But here's a few articles, there's many more on care homes. And this is emphasizing that there's been a huge spread in care homes. Ireland was 2/3 of all deaths around a week ago were care homes. It's still well over a half. And the UK as well, huge problem. And huge prevalence as well. I mean, CDC there in Boston showed homeless shelters. Now, they were mostly asymptomatic, but they had like 30-40% and huge prevalence. So that's just making that point. If we go to the next slide, let me see.
C5, yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of speaks to the population, another controversy. I mean, is there a lot of this in the population already? Because they're only testing very few. And here's just examples. The Telegraph reported that in Italy, they had 38% had antibodies in the regions affected, 9 regions. Again, I'm not sure that's correct or accurate. They don't give raw data. Germany had 15% in one town. That's published. Bottom left, we've got New York, random pregnant women that went in, 16% had it. Most asymptomatic, the orange slice there. So, and the prison, it only came out 2 days ago. There's a prison that has 73% of inmates, wow. 2,500 have it. So there's all of this data coming out, and phlebotomy, 15-30% have it. And the actual official studies are saying only a few percent, and some official sources like the WHO are saying around 1%. So I think this is a really interesting thing to watch as well. I wonder a virus that's highly transmissible, way more than the influenzas, that's accepted. Mm-hmm. And we know for a couple of months, it was completely uncontrolled across the West, spreading away. It's hard to imagine how only 1% could have it when we
Yeah.
see a lot of the other proof points. So this is controversial. And Professor John Ioannidis in Stanford produced antibody tests and suggested that 50 to 80 times more people had it than was being assumed in
Wow.
certain American areas. And he's being attacked now, saying that it's a bad study and it's really only down at the sub 1% level. So a very interesting topic, but the jury's out until there's an excellent antibody test that can truly catch everyone who had it, and it's widely applied.
Yeah,
So
we had your good friends on, sorry to talk over there, mate. We had your good friends on the Unwins, Dr. David and Jen Unwin the other day, and they were convinced they'd had it, and their son was poorly as well. But they all had the same symptoms apart from the son who had a higher temperature. So they'd got very little oxygen in their blood, so they had all the tests done. And when the test results came back, they're both doctors, as you know, and they said they hadn't had it, yet they're still convinced that they have had the virus.
I think it's very challenging because there's initial reports coming out to studies which suggest that younger or metabolically healthy people who fought it off with ease, it may have been more their innate immune system that fought it off, and they may not register antibodies, but if they fought it off with relative ease. So I think there's a lot more science to be done on this and to verify that there really are tests that show the majority who were healthy and fought it off, that we really are getting to see the evidence in the blood for certain. There's a risk of undercounting, possibly grossly, but this is not none of this is proven. So we'll see this emerge.
Yeah. Now, earlier on we talked about, or you mentioned that Sweden had approached the lockdown a little bit different. Shall we bring up some data
Yeah.
from Sweden, Jack?
I think, yeah, C6 is possibly the one. Yeah, we did C5. So Sweden is controversial, and I found myself feeling supportive for them because there's a lot of logic to what they're doing and evidence base, but they're also taking risks. And I know risks sometimes have to be taken to really understand things. But there's human lives here. So this is a really complex situation. But on the left, you see that their epidemiologist is being quite bullish still. I thought with their increasing deaths that they'd be getting more and more shaky. But he came out yesterday, and you can see the article there, and he's kind of saying that all the countries have gone and done the lockdowns instinctively. But when you look at the science, they're not really evidence-based. Now, we don't know who's correct yet. So he just makes the point that they are trying to stay evidence-based and let it spread with plenty of very sensible controls, isolating the elderly, though they admitted they did mess up on that. They didn't do it good enough. And let it move throughout the healthy population, because we're going to have to face it anyway. And so far, I've thrown a couple of graphs. They're kind of bending the curve somewhere in the middle of the pack in Europe. That's deaths per million, so that's corrected for the population. You can see Ireland. I put Denmark in because Denmark are the most comparable right beside Sweden, with similar population densities to Sweden, and their land bridge joined with a lot of traffic before they started. Apparently, Sweden are saying they did not protect their very large volume care homes, and Denmark apparently have smaller volume, and they may have had an advantage. But either way, yeah, Sweden has a higher hump than comparable countries, you could say. And only with time will we see that over time, the average is similar to the other countries. It's just other countries have pushed out their impacts further.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. We've got some more questions coming up. Before we do, yesterday the BBC in their 5 o'clock briefing said that in Oxford they have started to work on the vaccine, and they are going to start clinical trials this Thursday. What is that? Is that doable? I mean, it sounds amazing.
I just saw that this morning. It seems surprising when even, I mean, Bill Gates said 18 months. You know, most of the authorities said 18 months before it's going to be scaled commercially. And available, just because of the enormous safety challenges with making sure you go out with something that's safe.
Yeah.
And previous coronavirus vaccines, in the 30 years or so they've been working, they've never actually done a vaccine for this type of coronavirus successfully. But you could maybe argue there was never a need to, because the virus has passed with herd immunity anyway. But it is challenging. And when they've had previous ones, what happens is they've spiked the immune system of the people, but when they give them the virus, then their immune system overreacts even worse.
Yeah.
And part of the problem with this one is your immune system going kind of overboard.
Yeah.
So if they're starting human trials, that seems very soon.
Yeah.
I don't know.
One of the silver linings I like about it, if it is true, I'm sure it's true, because Matt Hancock was saying it yesterday, but the good thing is it's government funded from the university, so it might be that it's not big pharma that makes all the money out the back of this one. It could be, putting coffers back into the treasury, which might be interesting. But let's maybe not dwell on that too much, because it does sound too good.
The only
to be
other
true.
thing is, yeah, no, that's great news. If they're all, and maybe it was the previous SARS gave them a head start, that possibly. And the other thing is, my last slide when we get to it is actually Oxford University. So I'm going to finish on that one.
Let's do that now.
Well, let me see. Okay, we'll go. It's just Oxford University update 9th of April. And just to give a sample, it's not just wackos that are saying that maybe corona is not quite as bad as being perceived. So Oxford University here on their 9th of April update, where they had access to a lot of death data, you can read it there. It's blurred for me, but they're saying it could be in the range of up to 0.4%. 0.1 to 0.4, which is much lower than what's being perceived at the moment. Now, I think it's going to be up on the high end of that range or more. But they make some good points that in those without pre-existing health conditions and over 70, the data suggests the infection rate or the mortality rate will likely not exceed 1%. So even over 70, if you've no conditions, it shouldn't be too high. They also call out that children and the young, the impact is near zero. And that's also a very good sign, So I think they're being, fairly fair and balanced. And that's Oxford University now quoting figures that many out there in the internet sphere would say it's much worse than that. But that's why I only quote Oxford University or people of that ilk.
Yeah.
I'm not going to share any information that just comes from unusual sources. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, you have to be careful, don't you? I remember when I was researching my first book, I would look at things on Wikipedia, then I'd talk to a doctor friend and they'd go, well, that's just complete nonsense. So be careful what you read. Loads of questions coming in for you. Deborah says, in fact, quite a few good questions from Deborah. The first one, if the metabolic strong develop an immunity to the virus, how does that then protect those at risk from contacting it at a later stage? That's a great question.
Yeah, well, essentially, this is down to the concept of herd immunity. Now, herd immunity has become a dirty word, which I was amazed to see over the last few weeks. Herd immunity is only a principle that's been there forever. Now, it was mostly brought up in the last decades from vaccine companies and vaccine programs, because to tell people how important it is to get a vaccine, they said, well, we need enough people to take the vaccine to get herd immunity. So it's actually a vaccine kind of side of the house that began to use the term a lot. But in principle, it just means if you get it or you're vaccinated against it, you get an immune response, you then are relatively safe from not getting it again. And if you don't get it again, really, you're not going to create loads of viruses and load to give to someone else who's at risk. Yeah. So Sweden's policy is aiming towards a level of this, not amazing magic herd immunity with everyone immune, just to get a lot of people exposed and then over it, just like all the previous influenzas. And then it's safer for the people who are much more at risk. Yeah, that's it.
Really good point. And what people have to remember, isn't it, that viruses don't intend to kill people, because as soon as somebody dies, that kills off, that path for that virus. Virus needs people to stay alive. And back to that question earlier on from Chris Patterson, if this had happened in the 50s, then this virus probably would have been wiped out a lot quicker because we were all, more metabolically strong back then. So, as a nation, when this one has passed, we've got to get metabolically stronger so that, if we get the next one, COVID-20, whatever we're going to call it, we're in a stronger position to fight it off, because viruses don't like killing people. A few more quick questions. Spencer says, apologies if you've already asked this one. Masks or not masks for the general public? What's your view on that one, Ivor?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say masks. I mean, there's some tentative data from Germany that a lot of it could be surface transfer and maybe not so massively aerosol, like tiny droplets. But I think the balance of the evidence, you would have to say masks will really help with not you giving it to someone, and also help to a point of you not getting it. But if you put the two together and the two people are wearing masks, you get a synergy, right? So the masks for all hashtag I would agree with. I was disappointed that Sweden, when they took their kind of amazingly brave approach actually against the herd of what they did, that they didn't also try and do masks for all like Czechoslovakia. Because if they had added masks for all and properly protected their care homes, they could have really had a good strategy going, but they were a bit soft. So I'd say Taiwan has shown incredible success, and masks are one core part of it. And there's a great free documentary from Japan all about Corona and Taiwan and masks. And I have it on my YouTube, so I might send you the link. People should watch that. Definitely. And it has dramatized, laser tracked footage of people sneezing and even talking. And in a room, even talking and laughing, you see a cloud coming out of aerosol that does carry the virus, and it can sit for 15, 20 minutes in a room.
Wow. So,
yeah, I'd say masks are good call.
Yeah, it's a very touchy, what's the word? It's a subject that's really dividing people. It's a subject that I got shot down by Ofcom last week for just a question. I just said, what gives most protection? Is it a mask or vitamin C? And Ofcom came flying after me with all guns blazes. So I'm not going to get involved with this question at all. Deborah says, how does herd immunity help the most vulnerable? I think you've covered that really well, Just. Samuel says, what is the meaning? Oh, here's a great question. Samuel says, what is the meaning of viral load?
Viral load's an important point. So let's say you magically, let's say someone sneezes in your face, right? And you get, 100,000 viruses, and they get into your system. Your body takes time to mount its immune response. A lot of machinery has to go into play. Most complex machinery in the universe is the human immune system. It's incredible. But it takes time to get ready and build up and identify and build up its killer cells and all the rest. So if you get sneezed right in the face and you get a lot of virus, it may be well on its way to causing you serious damage and undermining your physiology before your immune system can get a grip on it. So if you compare to someone who is introduced with a couple of viruses or just dropped into their nose, that virus has to try and replicate. It's already beginning to trigger your immune system. Your immune system's gearing up the weaponry, right? So obviously getting a high viral load, it's broadly accepted, is much, much riskier for any given individual. And it's one of the reasons they suggest, and it makes logical sense, that healthcare workers who are younger maybe and less ill than the most victims, one of the reasons they may be getting hit harder is viral load, being in an environment where there's all these people who are sick,
Yeah, absolutely. It's one thing walking past somebody in the park, having one or two little viruses coming at you, or immersing yourself, as the NHS doctors and nurses and all the staff are working so hard on the front line. But yeah, you could be in a room, or take the prison that you just mentioned, where 80-something% have had it. Somebody in that prison, overweight, obese, full onslaught, is going to be in a far more dangerous position than somebody that just comes in touch with one or two.
And actually, just one other point on that, an incredible study came out a few days ago from the East. I'm not sure, was it China or one of the other countries? And they carefully analytically tracked, I think, over 300 actual cases. And they found that only one or two, or some ridiculously low number out of all cases, they tracked back to having been caught in the outdoors.
Right.
So a lot of people are making the point. Outdoors, your chances of catching it are probably vanishingly small compared to indoors, ironically. So it makes some of these things with the people running on the beach and they're being chased, it's kind of a bit weird. It doesn't really line up with the science.
Well, we need to do more research on that, don't we? Because we also know that if people do go outside and the sun's out and they get more vitamin D, triggered in the body, synthesized in the body from the sun, that helps boost your defense. So, if there's anybody sitting at home listening to this program right now saying, I just don't want to risk going outside, well, you've got to weigh up the two, haven't you? If it's a very low risk of getting, I'll keep your 2 meter distance, of course, but if you keep your 2 meter distance, the chances of getting it then sound very, very small. Whereas, you come back indoor, if you've got your vitamin D levels up, it just makes, we need more data, don't we, on this one?
Yeah, I think so. And that's why they had solariums and they had sanatoriums for TB. They got hugely positive results, putting people up in Denver, the Jewish hospitals at 5,000 feet with high UV at that altitude, greatly slowed down the severity of these diseases. And it's kind of a universal thing. UV also, your body creates nitric oxide. Nitric oxide has already been called out as a prophylactic for this disease, for the arterial impacts. Yeah. So it's not just vitamin D. I mean, the sun has many photoproducts, and it's going to help a lot. It's not magic, but I mean, it's not something to avoid. That's crazy.
Yeah. And as you know, because one of the things you really specialize in is the heart and avoiding heart disease. And Dr. Malcolm Kendrick was on the other day saying that anything you can do to get more nitric oxide into the body, whether it be from the sun, from exercise, from certain vegetables, you should do it because it relaxes the endothelium, the artery walls, and therefore, forget cholesterol almost. Check how much, try and get as much nitric oxide into the body to help relax the arteries. Is that something that the sun does give us?
Oh yeah, I mean, it is the source. It uses existing components in the body, but the UV then causes them to be converted. And there are many studies on this. I mean, even short bursts of sun have been shown to drop blood pressure immediately afterwards because nitric oxide dilates the vessels, endothelial health, like you say. Yeah. So I'd say it's a toss-up. The sun's required for vitamin D to get really high and really healthy. The sun's required really for nitric oxide. I mean, which is more important? Doesn't matter. They're both massively important. Get them both, Yeah.
So get outdoors, keep your 2 meter distance, but it looks like you're less likely to catch it outdoors anyway. Stay outdoors much as you can. Camp in the back garden. That's what we did 2 nights ago.
Garden.
So thank you for answering that one. What is the meaning of viral load? Christine says, concerning masks, surely Sweden didn't want to stop people from spreading the virus as herd immunity is their aim. So no masks kind of makes sense.
That is a great point. Absolutely. Again, I've had such screeching and kind of attacks for even discussing this data. It's an incredible phenomenon. I'm kind of being careful. So I was kind of saying, well, masks would have slowed things further so they could still go after their strategy, their goal, but just slower and with less risk of being having too high a spike too soon and looking bad and having people be too affected. Yeah. It would have been a safer strategy. They've gone for the current one. Currently, they are saying that their data is around a week out of date. Their ICU admissions have flattened off at only 60% of capacity. So they created a load of extra capacity. They're technically not needing it. So maybe they'll be okay. I just think they could have played safer with the masks addition.
Yep.
and
Well, we'll let you
a
draw.
bit less renegade.
We'll let you draw a line under that one so we neither of us get in trouble. Now, a few more slides, but before we do the final few slides, please tell us about extramovie.com.
Oh, yes. Our movie is just out around a week ago or so, and it's extratimemovie.com. It's down the bottom there. It's one word. It's only $3.99 to stream, or, well, $9.99 to download and own, which is a great option. And it's a feature-length movie. We spent a year and a half making it, supported by David Bobbitt and Irish Heart Disease Awareness, ihda.ie. But now we need to cover some of the final production costs. So fantastic movie, I would say. 45 Irish sports stars in their 50s who played the massive 1991 Meath versus Down match. And we go back when they're in their 50s and we scan them all with the calcium scan. And we find out that although they were all said to be healthy, well, a whole bunch of them had massive scores and multi-vessel serious disease. And in fact, some of them 9 of them had to go to cardiologists afterwards.
Wow.
And some of them had multiple way bypasses to save their lives. I mean, they needed urgent bypasses. And those were guys who the day before they were said to be healthy. So that's how you get a guy in his 50s, drops dead. He's not fat, he's not smoker. And everyone wonders, oh, what was it? Well, what it was no one ever looked inside. No one ever even checked that guy who just died with 4 kids. No one checked. Wow. And it's a 5-minute scan, a few $100, but no one's checking. And if you don't measure it, it don't get fixed. How can you? This is a tragedy. So we follow.
I keep saying to everybody, you can't manage what you can't measure. And if you're not measuring, how can you manage it?
That's it. And we follow the hero. We pick one guy who's willing to do all of what you and I, Steve, would suggest. Vitamins, minerals, real food, taking out the garbage, blood glucose meter, and we follow him for a year and we rescan him. So that's the climax of the movie as we find out what happened, Paddy.
Children friendly or not?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Good. That's what we're watching this afternoon then, Jack. That's going to be, well, this evening's movie. Can we look at Ivor's last couple of slides, Jack? And then we'll let him get on to his day job.
Okay, I think it's C7, is it? Jack, sorry, I'm just...
Yeah,
oh, yeah.
C7.
So, this is a controversial one to do as well, but I think it has to be discussed because if you don't discuss data, we're left in the dark, and that's just unacceptable. But it's just something that was sent to me, a German report to the German government. It's a few days old. It's the Koch Institute. This is absolutely 100% orthodox mainstream, okay, just so people know. And what you see there in the middle is the lockdown in the darker dashed line. But the R0, or the spreading dynamics, you can see that they were falling and falling and falling, and the spread was falling. So by the time they locked down, they'd already reached their dynamic. You can see afterwards, it doesn't change with lockdown. So maybe if you go to the next slide, sorry, Jack. Yeah. On the left, we see the Financial Times showing, very interestingly, the curve of the infections. And the red lines for all these countries are when they lock down. And essentially, there's not a lot of pattern emerging. So I suppose the question, and you could say it's controversial, is smart distancing, certainly with masks for all and all the smart measures, and protecting the over 70s and ill. All those smart measures put together, done well. The question is, does a complete lockdown add a lot more to what you can already achieve? And I think that's going to be a big question in the coming months.
That's a great question.
Yeah, and the last slide I'll show, oh, sorry, just to finish them off.
No, it's fine.
One thing that interests me, on the left here, you can see, here's a normal flu season. And I've added some stuff to make it easier to read. So essentially, this is the pattern of death in the UK. And the flu is shown in the red line there. So when a flu hits, you get around 3,500 extra deaths in the worst week. So it's pretty big now. It's pretty big, a flu, when it's bad. But what you can see is there's around 4 weeks to rise to the peak of lots of deaths. And then there's around 10 weeks for it to fall away. And that's actually not related to weather. really. That's related to the natural passing of a kind of a flu, kind of not a pandemic, but a normal flu. So it's 14 weeks. So if you compare it to the patterns emerging from all the countries with corona, uh, definitely the severity is less because corona in the UK is hitting 6,000 deaths a week, and there'll be multiple weeks at that high level, whereas this other flu was only a few thousand in 1 week. But the pattern of the flu here, the normal flu with no lockdown and no measures whatsoever, the pattern still flows over several months. And it's not massively dissimilar to the pattern for corona. Uh, so again, it's a question as to whether lockdown really changes things hugely compared to just smart distancing and masks and protecting the at risk. So again, I think this will be a question when we get all the data in the coming months. The only last thing I'd say is top right there is Iceland, which didn't actually technically do a lockdown, and they're going through a hump and a fall. And we'll see what happens Sweden. Yeah.
Great, great. Mate, thank you for pulling that all together. I've not seen anybody yet make it so concise as you've done across probably 10 or 15 slides, and some real good food for thought that I'd love every politician to rewatch this show, because when you look at it the way you've looked at it, it raises some really, really interesting thoughts, particularly about locking everybody down. 3 more questions. John says, is obesity an independent risk? What's the mechanism?
Obesity. Well, it's not so much the obesity, actually, and that's why we have TOFIs, thin outside, fat inside. So obesity is more a symptom of a problem, which is bad food or lack of exercise, all that stuff. Obesity is more a symptom rather than a driver. So essentially, if you do the wrong thing, you may get very obese if you're prone to putting on fat, or you may get TOFI and stay slim with fat in your organs, but you're at similar risk. So obesity correlates with risk because it correlates with having done the wrong thing and driven metabolic disease, but it doesn't so much cause it. And I give one example. I have a study with guys who are all 45 BMI. Now, these are mega big, 45 BMI. But what they did is they split them out into the 45 BMI that were insulin resistant, and then the number who were not insulin resistant. And what you saw was those huge, huge guys with low insulin resistance, and they're still actually healthy. They're metabolically healthy obese. And then most of them, though, big guys, are very insulin resistant. They're metabolically unhealthy obese.
Yeah.
But the risk for these huge guys who are not insulin resistant is not much different than an ordinary slim person.
Yeah.
So it's not the obesity. It's just that the obesity shows that you've been driving all the wrong drivers.
Yeah.
That's the way I'd say it. So it correlates.
Yeah.
So it's metabolic health. One last thing, if people get a fasting glucose and a fasting insulin in a blood test, very simple, and put them in a HOMA calculator, HOMA calculator, Google it, you'll get yourself your HOMA insulin resistance index, and it's the poor man's amazing measure of whether you're healthy or not.
We will make sure we put a link to that as well. That's great, great advice. I know you've got an absolutely busy day. I just can't thank you enough, mate, for coming on and making it so understandable. And for the rest of the day, we're going to be pushing World Health Day, as in looking after the planet. You've been fantastic as always, my friend.
Great stuff, Steve. Delighted to be here. Always enjoy it. And just
me
the
too.
last thing I'd say is, again, the coronavirus COVID is a very severe disease, more severe than influenza, even a bad one. And a lot of people are being affected. But just to reiterate, you cannot have that be a reason to not look at the data and openly discuss with freedom of information, freedom of scientific discussion. So I just give a message to people out there who are tending to suppress discussion. You know, you're not doing a good job for the whole of humanity at all, even if you think you are.
Brilliant. That's a great, great way to end the show. In fact, I'm going to end it straight there. as well. That was the brilliant Ivor Cummins. Please buy his book or go to his podcast series, which is absolutely fantastic on YouTube. And we'll be back again at the same time tomorrow.